And we have our next speaker. We appreciate and so much respect the work by World Coffee Research, the academic achievement that aims for sustainable development of coffee throughout the world. And Greg Meenahan is kind of new with WCR. He's a Partnership Director for World Coffee Research. Greg will share his thoughts and ideas about how organizations can frame and prioritize the current portfolio of sustainability projects in order to maximize return on investment and achieve a balance that leads to global impact. Come on up, Greg. Round of applause for Greg Meenahan.
Try to get one of these going. Okay. Excellent. The timer's running. The presentation's up. So before I get started, I just wanted to poll the room a little bit and get a little better understanding of who I'm talking to in the room. And I just, maybe by a show of hands, if you sell green coffee, raise your hand. If you sell green coffee. And if you buy green coffee, raise your hand. Okay. So my role at World Coffee Research as the Partnership Director is to coordinate the pre-competitive funding of research, of agricultural research and development on the coffee plant itself, on coffee production itself. The science, the biology, the genetics, the variety development of coffee, that's something that World Coffee Research is doing. And this becomes a very important element in this whole conversation of coffee sustainability and coffee profitability that we were hearing from Colleen, for instance. You know, to just having the information that, being a farmer and having the information that you need in order to predict what kind of yield you're going to have with what kind of fertilizers and inputs on what kind of soil in what kind of location. This information is not widely available. It's not very accurate, and and what it ends up meaning is that coffee farmers don't have the same tools that other profitable farmers have in other commodities around the world. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm going around, and I think another important part here is that typically it is producers, it is farmers who pay for the agricultural research and development, or they advocate their governments for funding for agricultural research and development. And in the coffee lands, this hasn't happened. Coffee farmers are spread out all over the world. They speak many languages. They're very isolated very often. These coffee supply chains go into the most rural places on the planet. And so the coffee producer has not been able to be an effective advocate for the commodity itself, for the plant itself. Believe me, if you're a potato grower in Idaho, United States, and you're growing potatoes for McDonald's, you have access to this information. You know what your yields are going to be. You know how your soil type is going to interact with those fertilizers. You know what kind of pests in your area, and you know the most cost-effective way to deal with those pests and diseases. But this kind of information for coffee farmers is not available, is not readily available, and it's really making coffee farming very difficult. And as we heard from Colleen, you know, everybody in this room that is in the coffee industry should be very concerned that coffee farmers are not profitable, that we're not even covering the costs of production. And believe me, can you stay in the middle? Oh, because what? Oh, do you want me to stand here? Here? Okay. Let's see. The idea of covering the cost of production as the bar that we're going for, to me, is almost is concerning of itself, and is almost an indication of how bad the situation is. Because, you know, let's face it, how many people who are in business in this room are trying to break even? You know, break even is the same as going out of business. And what we actually are seeing here is that we've got coffee producers that are not even breaking even, they're below, and this is happening all over the world. And so if that's the case, the entire industry is endangered. So now what I'm doing is, because coffee farmers aren't good advocates, aren't in the position to fund and advocate for coffee research and development, what I'm doing is I'm going to the other end of the value chain. I'm going to the roasters and the importers, and I'm saying, listen, we've got to get this done. We've got to get better plant material in the ground. We've got to get improved varieties in the ground. We need to understand the interactions between terroir and variety much better than we do. And we need to have our coffee farmers profitable and not covering cost of production. We need coffee communities to be thriving. We need them to be flat screen TVs and new Jeeps. This is what we want in the coffee lands, not just, you know, begrudgingly covering the cost of production. So I'm going around to all of these businesses and I'm saying, hey, listen, typically it's the producers who pay for this, but that's not happening. So we all have to kind of pitch in pre-competitively to pay for this coffee research and development. And because of that, I am actually seeing the sustainability programs from coffee companies and coffee importers all over the world. And essentially, my presentation today is really what I've learned in doing that, in the different kinds of sustainability, and the different kind of frameworks for thinking about sustainability. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. Sustainability, one of the things that I'm seeing in the industry is sustainability means different things to different people. You've got people who are talking about environmental sustainability. So, you know, if you're talking with somebody from Rainforest Alliance, you're talking to somebody from Conservation International, you're going to hear a view of sustainability from that position. Economic sustainability, this is, you know, exactly what Colleen was talking about. Is growing coffee profitable? And you have social sustainability, and that is, you know, is there sufficient income for those things that again, in Colleen's presentation that she was pointing out, you know, the livability, the school fees, the food, is there enough resources in this community for education and things like that? So social sustainability. And what I'm seeing is that very often people have different programs, different sustainability programs that address these different things. Very often I'll see somebody maybe new in sustainability and they'll go right to social sustainability. They'll want to build a school or put in some water, put in some infrastructure for the community. And clearly that's a long-term investment in that community. And what I basically want to say is that all three of those things are all part of sustainability, and they all sort of pillars, and this is sort of the classic 3 pillars of sustainability picture here. But I'm going to also say that when you're thinking about these 3 different pillars, it's really important to have a balance and also sort of an understanding of how to prioritize these different things. And now, as I'm thinking about the audience that we have here today, I'm thinking that this talk, rather than sort of guiding your own sustainability program, is really going to help you to evaluate the sustainability programs of other roasters and importers that are telling you right now that they have a sustainability program. So this is going to give you some insights into being able to evaluate the power and quality of that program. I'm going to also posit here that economic sustainability is perhaps the most important thing to focus on initially. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty clear. if the farmer goes out of business, if we stop growing coffee, environmental sustainability and social sustainability sort of become moot points at that time. You really can't move the needle on environmental sustainability if your coffee farmer goes out of business. And the same in terms of the social sustainability. If that community loses resources from growing coffee, being able to sustain schools, health clinics, these different things are not going to be possible. So economic sustainability is key. And as we see, the industry when it comes to economic sustainability is also in a crisis at this point. Oop, here we go. There's a concept in project planning called critical path thinking. And critical path thinking, the reason why I have a rocket ship up here is because critical path thinking was utilized to put a man on the moon. And it's a project planning technique where what you're trying to do is when you have a big, audacious goal, when you have a very hard-to-reach goal, like putting a man on the moon in 1960 when we hadn't even put a rocket in orbit yet, that may not be true, not a man in orbit yet. It requires being able to think of every step along the way that you need to achieve and also the order that those steps go into in order to achieve that final goal. And I would say that coffee sustainability, from my perspective, is a lot like a moonshot in some ways. This is a very big goal with a lot of moving parts. And what we want to do, though, is we want to reach the moon. We want to be able to get there. And so one of the things about critical path project planning is that there's a real clear concepts of there are certain things that you have to do first. There are certain preconditions that have to be in place in order for you to reach that moon. You don't start working on the spacesuit when you don't have a capsule yet that can sustain life in an airtight condition in outer space, for instance. So there's a certain critical path there. And I think on this, the industry, by and large, is in agreement that economic sustainability is absolutely key and is absolutely vital. This came out of the global, the Coffee Sustainable Catalog, which from the Global Coffee Platform, 2016. This was a survey, I think of 160 different individuals, and most respondents shared the consensus that economic sustainability is a prerequisite for prosperity and well-being. Well-being of producers and also for environmental conservation. Now, when it comes to profitability, everybody's clear about that, but the focus tends to be on these different levers of profitability. And again, Colleen was hitting on some of these points again, where we're talking about increasing profitability through higher yields, increasing profitability through quality, through price, and then cost of production. So these are all different ways that you're going to see different sustainability programs really trying to move the needle on environmental, on economic sustainability. Is that they'll have a plan, and maybe, for instance, those programs can look like where you're trying to increase quality. And so coming in and helping farmers with the post-production and post-harvest in terms of what's happening at the beneficio, how coffee is being picked, making sure that it's picked when it's ripe, and a lot of these different things in order for that farmer to experience the benefit of having a higher quality and then therefore a higher price. And obviously these things are also very beneficial to the person buying the coffee. That's also in their interest. They're looking for more, better coffee from these producers. So let's help producers make more money. And here's an interesting quote from Christophe Montagnon. He's a scientific director at WCR, and this is, I think, really important for everybody to understand, that it's not enough that coffee farming even becomes profitable. It really has to be more profitable than any other possible use for that land. If, as a farmer, I can grow an alternative crop and make more money, then I should do that. I should not be growing coffee. If I can make more money by selling my land to a developer, then I should do that, okay? That's in my best interest as a farmer. And so the challenge here isn't even cover the cost of production, you see. It's not even make a profit. It's got to be the most profitable way for that producer to make money. So this is what the industry is currently doing. Rough survey, everybody says this is maybe even a little bit low. 2016, $370 million in investments. And these investments are things like agricultural extension services, okay, so farmer education, business support, really, you know, helping people plan for business, track costs of production, these sorts of things. Traceability and assurance, access to finance, incentives generally meaning quality incentives, demand generation. Fair trade has a role in doing that, as well as some of the other things. And so these are the tools that we have, and this total amount equals about 2% of the production value of the green coffee. And when you take a look, and again, I'm kind of a bit of an outsider. I knew nothing about coffee 2 years ago until I came to World Coffee Research. And prior to that, what I did is I worked in social services and in helping people improve their lives, helping poor people get on their feet. And a lot of times, one of the things that were happening in social services is that, you know, you'd have these programs to help people, and they were millions and millions of dollars. And somebody finally said, well, what if you just wrote a check to each one of these people and just gave them the money? How does that work out? And actually, you know, it kind of works out sometimes to be pretty good if the programs you have are very expensive and are not getting the results. But so the question becomes, you know, why not just pay producers that 2% more? And one of the reasons is 2%, as we saw, is not going to get anybody to profitability, and it's certainly not going to protect that farm against other potential crops that may become more valuable to grow down the road. The reason why we do it is because really investing in a producer creates this self-sustaining system of prosperity and well-being. So what we're really focused on with a sustainability investment is we're trying to build the capacity of that particular farmer. Rather than just give them a handout or just to pay them more for their coffee. We were really looking to, the industry is very interested that a certain percentage of that money be utilized in such a way that that farmer can produce more profitably year over year. So, balancing your sustainability portfolio with strategies that impact both individuals and the sector as whole. This was if you have the book with my presentation, this was a slide that I changed a little bit. I was initially talking about upstream and downstream investments, but really when I looked a little bit more at it, it's really about strategies that impact individuals or sectors. And so a program that would impact an individual farmer, for instance, is going to be, you know, getting down the farm and working with them to help them improve quality or to provide extension services so that that farmer knows how to handle fungus in a better and new way or different harvesting techniques. Things that impact the sector as a whole are going to be things like the development of a nursery in a region, okay? A seed sector development. This is something that many of you probably don't realize, but in coffee there's a huge problem, and that is that there really isn't a viable seed sector, a business of selling seeds and seedlings to coffee farmers. And so primarily what happens is coffee farmers do this themselves. And it's not working out great for them for a lot of different reasons. So that's another way to look at these sustainability programs. Is this sustainability program really trying to work with a specific group of farmers, or is this taking a more capacity building, a system-wide approach to this? Because you can go into a specific region and do a lot of work and actually not move the needle that far on the global production in terms of its own sustainability. You can have a lot of impact in a smaller area, but it becomes very difficult to make the kind of systemic changes that the coffee industry needs to make if that's the only piece that's happening. There we go. So sector-wide versus individual impact. Here's some examples of what I'm talking about. Individual impact would be teaching producers how to make organic fertilizer production, or to help a specific farm with a bioswale. Sometimes these, Mother Parker's is a big roaster, and they have a program that they're doing called WaterWise, and this is working with individual farms that are currently polluting the rivers that they're close to, because during the demucilage process, when they're taking the cherry off, all that cherry is just going into the rivers, and the rivers are becoming so contaminated that it's making the animals sick. So in this case, what they're doing is they're coming in, they're putting in a bioswale, they're running that wastewater over some vegetation, and by doing that, the water that actually gets down to the river is actually quite clean. But again, this is an impact that's going to impact that single farm. Now, something that's maybe more sector-wide is going to be pesticide reduction strategies, or fungicide application strategies and reduction strategies. So this becomes information that anybody who is dealing with fungicide, or anybody who is dealing with fertilization rates, or any kinds of things like this, can then utilize that information to help them to be more profitable. In the economic sustainability thing, again, you can make that same division between sort of this sector-wide versus individual impact. We talked about farmer training, good agricultural practices. Access to inputs becomes more of a sector-wide issue. Nursery development, I was mentioning, also becomes a sector-wide issue. Business support, again, that's going to be more at the co-op level, at the individual farmer level. Diversification support, so that's about, hey, have you thought about growing these bay nuts? There's a good local market for those here in DR Congo. Value addition at origin, and again, this is, down to the individual farmer. That's going to be a program primarily about adding more value to the product, doing more of the processing right there, producing maybe your own roasted coffee. And then the social sustainability piece, again, that tends to be sector-wide. That tends to be more general. I mean, when you have schools and health clinics and teachers and doctors and social inclusiveness in these programs, this is obviously vital to the sustainability of the community. So, some things about sector-wide activities that you can begin to look at and recognize. One of the things about them is that they're generally pre-competitive, meaning that it takes many partners to come together and make that happen. So again, when you're trying to evaluate the sustainability program of somebody, what are they doing that is in concert with the rest of the industry? What are they leaning into in that way? How are they doing that particular piece? The other thing about these sector-wide activities is that they tend to be scalable, okay? You can, for instance, the development of a new coffee variety that increases yield by 30 to 45%, that's a very scalable idea. You get those new seedlings out to farmers, and those plants begin to produce. That's something that's very scalable. Something that's not as scalable is farmer education, because you have to teach each farmer. You have to do that piece. So that becomes much more expensive and much more time intensive to make happen. With sector-wide activities, results and impacts are delayed. And this is something that you have to realize as well, and not have this expectation that if you're doing something like developing a new variety, that you're going to see the impact in the following year. And also the results and impacts are shared. They're shared amongst the whole sector. On the individual side, these tend to be competitive. These are often competitive investments. If I'm an exporter or if I'm an importer, I have a supply chain, I have certain farmers that I'm working with. I have a competitive interest that my farmers produce more, better coffee cheaper. And so I can help them, if I help those particular farmers to do that, then I could also have a competitive advantage as an exporter, importer. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no harm in that whatsoever. That drives a lot of good improvements in production. So these things are going to impact individuals or specific groups of producers, like in co-ops. They're very difficult, sometimes impossible, to scale. So they tend to be designed for small areas, small regions, smaller groups of producers. But you have to realize that if that is the entire sustainability portfolio of that particular exporter, the needle on coffee sustainability is not going to move. That's going to be, it's a narrow sphere of influence at that point. So, but some of the benefits of it is that the results of it can be obtained immediately. You know, you teach 30,000 farmers how to make organic fertilizer, and suddenly they're feeding their plants better, and you can see that in the following year. And also, and this is key, is that the results and impacts can be owned by the organization funding it. So that also tends to be something pretty important. So, you know, Keurig Green Mountain, when they want to support, they have a goal of being able to support, to change the farming practices of 1 million farmers. And when they make a sustainability effort, what they're able to do in this, with individual impact and sustainability, is they're able to really put their name on it and say, these 3,000 farmers here in Rwanda, we did that. We trained that. And here are the pictures, and here are the interviews, and they can put their name on it, and they can brand that. And that's also important, and very attractive to businesses. But again, what you're looking for in a sustainability program, a balanced portfolio, is you're going to have some activities like that, but you're also going to see the sector-wide activities. So whether it's a sector-wide or individual impact strategy, success equals impact, right? So no matter which one of these things, what you want to do is you want to be able to say some kind of positive change has happened here. This picture, by the way, underneath the print is one of the on-farm technical trials that World Coffee Research is doing, where we're testing 2 improved varieties and 2 improved agronomic treatments over what the farmer has existing. It's kind of a neat aerial shot there. So, impact, change. This is, again, this is a little bit of my social services background, nonprofit background coming here, is that when you're trying to change something, you're trying to move from one state to another, very often you develop this thing called the theory of change. And so I'm telling you about this idea of theory of change so you can begin to understand or try to deduce what the theory of change is for any given sustainability effort that you happen to see. And theories of change link the activities to outcomes, explaining how and why the desired change is expected to happen. So here's an example of that. Let's say the desired outcome is to increase yield per hectare by 25%. So that's your desired outcome. There's going to be some underlying assumptions to that. So one of the underlyings to your plan, to your strategy, there's going to be some underlying assumptions. And let's say one of those underlying assumptions is good agricultural practices are not known, so therefore are not being used. And also there's another assumption here is increased yield equals increased profit. So again, from Colleen's talk earlier, we already know that increased yield does not necessarily mean increased profit. And also, you would have to, if you're going to be providing good agricultural practices as that strategy, you really do have to try to figure out, well, what do these, is that the problem here? Are these producers, do they not understand good agricultural practices? So the causal model is teach producers good agricultural practices and yield per hectare will increase, resulting in more profit. So this is back to that list of sustainability activities that's happening, and each one of these, our strategies, have a theory of change to it. You can see agricultural extension services. Again, we talked about some of the underlying assumptions that might be there. Business support. And one of the things about all of these strategies and any theory of change is that strategies are often interdependent. So for instance, if you're teaching good agricultural extension services, and part of that is a fertilization plan, but your producers don't have access to inputs, then you have a problem. Just teaching a farmer how to use fertilizer if they don't have access to fertilizers becomes a problem. So you begin to see here that when you're evaluating a sustainability program, and that sustainability program is, providing good extension services, you have to ask yourself what other dependencies might be impacting that the outcome that you desire to make happen there. If assumptions do not exist or are offset by interdependencies, the rate of return will be compromised. So again, this is about really mitigating your risk of your sustainability portfolio. You can invest an enormous amount of time and effort in a program, and it's really important to understand what are the chances that this doesn't have the desired effect that we want. This happens all the time in international development. You may have heard that up to 80 or 90% of all money spent on international development does not have the intended effect. And largely that's because of these interdependencies that are really hard to figure out. So again, this is a way of trying to evaluate the degree of risk in a sustainability portfolio, is really trying to see, are the preconditions, are the interdependencies understood, and do they make sense? Is economic sustainability possible? And really, what tools are we using? What tools are missing? One of the things that I pick up on from the industry as I'm going around and talking with various individuals whose very companies are dependent upon there being good supplies of high quality coffee, is that it is like a moonshot. It's like you're in your garage and you're trying to figure out, how can I actually move the needle on this thing? The industry is spending a lot of money on good agricultural practices, on logistics services, on all kinds of different things. But there is something here and that is missing from this list. And that's, where is agricultural research and development? It's not even on the list. Agricultural research and development does turn out to be one of those sector-wide programs. Agricultural research and development is imminently scalable. And really, for the last 150 years, for any commodity, for any farmer, agricultural research and development has been the precondition for profitability. And what I can tell you is that in the coffee lands, research and development is getting shortchanged. There's not enough money being spent on research and development. There's a couple exceptions to this. Colombia, for instance, has a research and development effort happening, and Brazil does, Vietnam does. And you can tell those are 3 countries that are in the top 3 or 4 producers in the world. So the impact of research and development on farmer well-being is indisputed, and we can even see when it works very well. I was in the Philippines a few weeks ago at the Southeast Asian Coffee Education Conference, and there we were having different conversations, and there was a researcher from Vietnam there. And one of the things that he was very clear to point out is that Vietnamese coffee farmers are not struggling. Vietnamese coffee farmers are doing just fine, right? And this was very interesting to hear, and it was really the first time I'd ever heard about coffee farmers that weren't really struggling to make the cost of production. Now, and I want to make another point about that Vietnam conversation that I had. So the Vietnamese coffee farmers are doing just fine. Why are they doing just fine? They're doing just fine because their yields are huge, okay? We were seeing yields per hectare that Colleen had up there, and you were seeing 0.5 metric tons per hectare, 1 metric ton per hectare. I think the best example of one had 2 tons. So there at the average is 3.5 metric tons per hectare in Vietnam. And so the question then becomes, well, is that, okay, you've got the economic sustainability piece down. Is it now environmentally sustainable? And this is where we discovered that actually probably not. The reason that they're getting those huge yields is because they're putting an enormous amount of fertilizer into the ground. The enormous amount of fertilizer is creating acidification of the soil. This acidification is making it a breeding ground for nematodes, which are these microscopic worms that eat the feeder roots of plants and once they're there, they become a very, very difficult thing. They begin to really cause significant problems in coffee growing regions. But they do have the economic sustainability figured out, and they're aware of the environmental sustainability issue, and they're beginning to deal with that because they want to be able to keep their farmers making good money. Now, here is a slide that just illustrates how under-innovated, how little ag research and development is happening in coffee. Here you have in corn, you have 6 different species of corns and 20,000 varieties. In apples, 62 different species of apples and 7,500 different varieties, and let's skip down to coffee, where you have 125 different coffee species, but only 50, it's actually 54 varieties have been developed by breeders. This is just telling you that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and that coffee farmers don't have near the tools as orange farmers or corn farmers or any of these kinds of things. And the other thing, too, here is that the rates of return on research and development are huge. We did a desk study here, over 1,800 observations about research and agricultural research and development, looking for what is the return. And to summarize this, the average is about 81% return on the dollar, okay? And again, that's a lot because information is very powerful. When you know how a variety is going to interact on your land and you know what's going to happen in terms of production and productivity, that becomes extremely, extremely powerful. If you have a new variety that lowers your losses due to Leroya or cherry beetle borer, that becomes very significant. That immediately hits the bottom line. If you have a new variety that just has a baseline higher genetic capacity for quality at lower elevations, suddenly a farmer who is growing coffee at 900 meters can hit some higher quality marks with a different variety more suited for those lower elevations. So, went through all of those things, tried to even separate out the difference between field crops like maize, wheat, and rice versus tree crops. And tree crops are coming in really at an average of about an 88% return. Now, in coffee, because so little of this work has been done, what I'm seeing is that the return is probably going to be significantly higher than that. One of the things that you're going to be hearing more and more about in terms of variety development is these new varieties called F1 hybrids. Okay, an F1 hybrid it's not GMO or anything, but what it is that the breeders take two very distantly related, two plants that have genetic distance between them, and they bring those two taking the pollen from one and taking a paintbrush and putting it on another. And when they do that, a phenomena happens, is that the offspring of that cross has a plant vigor. It has vigor that exceeds that of either parents. And vigor is kind of underselling what this is. This is like super plants. We're talking plants that grow twice as fast, have twice the yield, have twice the strength, have twice the frost resistance we discovered last year. And the reason for that is this concept called heterosis. That's the phenomena. When you take two varieties of the same species that have genetic distance and you bring them together, you're going to have this phenomena called heterosis. And it happens both in plants and animals. It's been a very well-known piece. So F1 hybrids are these plants that have these superpowers, and they're going to absolutely help farmers deal with all kinds of things like pests and diseases, low yields, better quality, but also one of the most important things is with climate adaptation. These plants are going to help us weather the droughts, deal with the big rain events. All of these things are really helpful. I was talking to a El Salvadorian coffee producer a few weeks ago, and she primarily grows Bourbon. And she gets a very good price for her Bourbon, or at least a small part of her Bourbon crop she gets a very good price for. And she went to a farm in Mexico that were growing some of these new F1 hybrids. And she could not believe that this plant that was already had cherry was only 18 months old. Typically, it takes 3 to 4 years before a Bourbon plant is really going to be producing cherry. And here you have these plants that were laden with cherry already at 18 months. She was blown away. So the question in terms of your ability to move the needle on this is really trying to increase your understanding of what sustainability means, how your importer or exporter or roaster may be talking about sustainability. Nick, during the break, we were having a conversation, and he said from a customer-facing point of view, customers just want to know that you care about it, that you care about sustainability. And that's almost enough to satisfy a customer in terms of whether or not they want to continue to buy your coffee. But though that's important, it's not enough that exporters and importers and roasters care about sustainability. We have to get this done. We have to move the needle on sustainability. We have to reach the moon. And so it really requires having coffee leaders to understand what sustainability is, to be able to evaluate the various sustainability plans from that are in the marketplace, and even to poke holes in those plans, to be able to ask those hard questions. It's simply, it's not going to happen from the customers. It's only going to happen from people within the industry that are able to do this. So, key points here, evaluate your portfolio for priority and balance. Think about individual versus sector sustainability investments. And quantify the risk of the sustainability plan by evaluating the underlying assumptions. And that's all getting at that theory of change. Of all the main tree crops, coffee genetics is the least explored. That's just a fact. Research and extension has paid off for many other commodities, and we need to get that payoff to our coffee producers. And there's vast technical areas for improving coffee yield and adaptation. So bottom line there, coffee research and development will pay off. So with that, I'll take some questions or...
Okay, big round of applause for Greg. Can I have a seat with me? A little warm.
A little bit. This is the fun part. I wanted to get my talk done in 15 minutes so I'd be able to talk with Nick.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And so you are partnership director.
That's right.
So in many ways, it's kind of, you're out there essentially looking for new partners to, let's bring funding and to help fund a lot of this research and all the work that you've been talking about. So let's cut to the chase. Make your pitch to this audience, because you have partners all around the world. It is world coffee research, not America or any particular place. And so, let's hear it.
Well, I think the pitch has already been made, and that is, anybody who is a roaster who is selling or buying green coffee really does and can contribute to this kind of agricultural research and development. You can certainly contact me after this, and we can talk about how that might look.
You have business cards, right?
I have business cards, that's right. And there's various strategies that we've developed to allow both large and small roasters to participate in this research. And also the reality, too, is that this has never happened before. This is in some ways like for instance, you've got researchers doing watermelon research, okay? And in some ways, what I'm doing is it's like going to the grocery store owner and asking them to pay for research and development on the watermelon that they're selling, okay? This is not typically how it happens. It's the watermelon farmers that advocate and pay for this kind of research and development. But that's not happening in coffee, and it's not about to happen. It's not going to happen. So so now I'm going to the other end of the value chain, which is where you all sit, and really opening up that channel and allowing you to contribute to this agricultural R&D. It's a fascinating piece of the coffee puzzle. If you're a coffee lover and you can't get enough about the technical, you're going to particularly enjoy this. I just scratched the surface of F1 hybrids and talked a little bit about on-farm technical trials that we're doing, but it's very fascinating. And the other benefit here is that if you do begin to support this research, you can begin to talk about your own sustainability program and what you're supporting in terms of that, in terms of this sector-wide, highly scalable, providing much needed tools to the farmer as well. So you can begin to tell that story of cutting edge sustainability on your own websites and to your own customers.
So talk about those different mechanisms for roasters and different coffee companies to partner with WCR.
Well, one of them is called the Checkoff Program, and the Checkoff Program is something that we borrowed from European and North American commodities. This is where producers typically say, like if you're an avocado grower in California, you belong to the Avocado Association of California, and 4 cents out of every pound of coffee that you sell as a producer. Avocados, that's right.
You said coffee.
Oh, I'm sorry. 4 cents of all the avocados that you sell go to the Association for California Avocado Growers. And they then use that money to do agricultural research and development. They also use it to do lobbying at the state level for land use practices and things like that. And they also use some of that for marketing. And this is exactly what's happening, for instance, at the FNC in Colombia. The FNC is that agricultural research and development entity in Colombia. 6 cents a pound is going to support that right now, and so every Colombian producer is paying for that. They don't have a choice, it's mandated. And for that, they get Juan Valdez, okay, that's the person out there pitching for Colombian coffee, but they also get agricultural research and development for that. And
that's almost like a tax.
That's exactly. Exactly. And so what we're doing here is we're basically saying, hey, there's a self-imposed tax that you can do, and what you can do there is you can pick the rate that you want to do. And I was talking with another roaster just before this talk, and just trying to figure out what his rate might be, and he was relatively small, but basically the roasters are picking rates between 1/2 penny a pound and 10 cents a pound. The bigger the roaster you are, the smaller the price per pound generally tends to be. One of the biggest entities we have in this program right now, happened recently, is Dunkin Donuts. And so Dunkin Donuts they have their dark roast and they have an original roast, and they are putting an extra 1/2 penny a pound on all the green coffee they buy for the original roast that is sold in the United States. And so that's going to turn out to be about $500,000 a year. But it's also small roasters that are doing a penny a pound or 2 pennies a pound, and these contributions are coming in anywhere from $500 to $10,000. Allegro, different people.
And so, anyone in the room who is interested could talk to you maybe after.
That's right. And I think, too, the other piece of this is you can definitely talk to me, but I'm very interested in helping you to talk about sustainability, okay, and to improve your ability to talk about sustainability. That's also very important for the industry, is that everybody begin to sing from the same page, that everybody really understand the same framework and begin to advocate for this critical path to coffee sustainability.
You mentioned a couple of times, and I mentioned to you, it's one of my favorite words about WCR, pre-competitive. So the idea that, in the business arena, we're going to have, competition with each other as if you're in the same sort of sector. But World Coffee Research operates on a much more pre-competitive level. Talk about that and the sort of value for the industry in that way.
So in terms of pre-competitive, for instance, when we develop a new coffee variety, the intellectual property of that variety is going to belong to World Coffee Research. And the reason why we're going to remain ownership of that intellectual property is to ensure that it's free for anybody who wants to put it in the ground. And so in this way, what you're doing is the coffee industry is all pitching in to do this work that is going to help everybody become more profitable and more sustainable in the long run. So for me, is a little bit of a challenge that it's pre-competitive, because like I said, most organizations really want to have a sense of ownership on that sustainability program that they have. They want to be able to say, we help those farmers right there, and here are the stories, and here are the pictures of the village, and here's before and after. They want to be able to say, we did that. And it becomes a little bit more difficult when what you're doing is pitching in to develop a research and development capacity that's really never going to go away. World Coffee Research is going to, it's not a sustainability project. It's a sustainability capacity that the industry desperately needs. And so, again, what we're trying to do, that's one of the reasons that the Checkoff Program is so good, because it is a sustainable way to fund agricultural research and development. But other groups are more oriented towards making a multi-year pledge or just making an annual gift, and that's what we have here in Korea and Japan. Most of the roasters are not doing the price per pound piece. They're just writing checks. Basically any kind of involvement whatsoever, I think, is certainly a worthwhile thing to do.
I'll let you have some water while I ask my last question. Talk a little bit about how people can engage some of the work that World Coffee Research has already done. I know that there have been a lot of partnerships, especially with SCA. The new flavor wheel that came out a few years ago is all based on World Coffee Research, and things like that. So talk a little bit about, for roasters and maybe cafe people especially, where and sort of what you think people should go to first if they want to learn more.
Well, I really appreciated hearing you talking about the coffee industry in the early 2000s, where you maybe knew origin, but variety you didn't know, altitude you didn't know. And clearly, variety, altitude, terroir, all those things are becoming more and more important. And one of the ways that one of the really neat ways is that there's this website. It's actually an online variety catalog called the World Coffee Research Variety Catalog, and it's a catalog that was actually designed for coffee producers, not coffee roasters. And so in it, it talks about yield, and it talks about this variety's resistance to this disease or that disease. It talks about the cupping potential of that particular variety. But it's absolutely fascinating, and I think that roasters, when they're beginning to talk more and more about specific varieties and what's going on with these varieties, what's the parentage of the varieties? How did this what made up this particular variety, this SL28, this Catamore, this Sarchamore? All of that kind of information is available on that website, and I think that this is something that can help roasters, for instance, tell a more full story about the various varieties that they're growing. Also, one of the things that happen to roasters that go to origin very often is unknowingly they can really cause a lot of problems for farmers by coming to a particular roaster and saying, you know what, I love your Bourbon, you need to plant more of this Bourbon, or I love that Pacamara that you've got, you need to plant more of that, I'll buy as much of it as you can. Or, I love your coffee. If it was organic, I would buy all this coffee. And farmers will respond to the market, and oftentimes with disastrous results. A lot of times roasters don't realize that when they're advocating for an organic farming practice, they don't really understand the risks that they're asking that producer to undertake in order to achieve that organic piece. And very often the producers themselves don't understand the risk of that. And again, Pacamara, that happens to be just one of the weakest coffee plants that are out there. And yes, it does, if it's planted in the right location and it's treated just the right way, you can get this exceptional cup of coffee, no question about it. But the roaster very often doesn't know what they don't know, and in advocating for a particular variety or a particular farming method, they could be doing untold damage to that particular producer. So that's another way.
Very good. Well, Greg, thank you so much. And everyone here appreciates your talk and answering all these questions. One more time, big round of applause. Greg Meenahan from World Coffee Research.